Biodiversity loss in the UK is a significant problem, more than we ever realise. We're one of the worst in the world for biodiversity loss.
Where are we really at when it comes to water? Because people need to hear this.
There are things you can do, but you can also lobby your brands and those people who have more power to do bigger things.
This episode is brought to you by White Griffin, Westgate Labs and Equestrian tapeworm testing.
Hello.
Hello.
Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday. How are you doing?
Good. Episode 30, Miri. Season finale of season 3. Can you believe it? I mean, Miri's been asking me to do this podcast for years, and now we're on episode 30.
Yeah, it feels like quite a momentous moment, really. And I just feel so grateful that so many people are so interested in all of the things that we've been talking about. And I feel like this season we've really sort of hit our groove when it comes to, having really cool people that are coming and saying really cool, forward-thinking things. And I actually received a message from somebody through my community. They were like, I don't do social media anymore, but I love your podcast, and I wanted to reach. She supports me through Patreon, and I wanted to reach out and basically just say how grateful she was, because she said that she had been feeling very alone, very not supported by the people around her in the equestrian world. Social media became a horrible place for her. She felt like it was a real place of judgment, and she found herself doing a lot of comparison, and she found that very not positive. So she stopped, and I think, well, hey, good for you, because I know how difficult and powerful social media can be. It really holds people in its thrall, doesn't it? But she still wanted to reach out and tell us how much she loved the podcast and how she really felt like she'd found some people who were her people. And I think we've had a lot of messages like this of how nice it is to feel seen and heard, and that you're not alone. And yeah, I think we've done something really cool. So well done.
I
for sticking
agree.
with it.
And I had a very similar experience actually at the weekend. And this is really lovely actually for anyone that's doing anything. When you get social media numbers and you're like, oh, it was only seen by 100 people or whatever it is, it can feel really small. But imagine meeting those 100 people and how mind-blowing that would be. So I took Harley to a dressage competition on last Sunday. And we were warming up, and there's this woman on the outside, and she's watching Harley and I, and she's smiling. And I was like, oh, that's really nice. That makes me feel like we must look quite nice. And he was going really beautifully. And we went into the test, and up by the judge on the right-hand side, there was a bench, and there were some people sort of standing up, sitting down, dogs and stuff. And he kind of had a spook. So I walked him around that corner, and then I kind of nursed him around it every time we got there. And at the end of the test, I went over to that corner and I was like, have a look, you're all right, kind of thing. And this woman on the bench went, well done, Rhi. And I was like, huh? I was like, what? And anyway, a few seconds later, she came up to me with somebody else, and they were like, wow, we're just fangirling, we follow you and we love the podcast. And I was like, oh my gosh. And they were just so lovely. They were like, thank you for just being so relatable and normal and speaking to everyday people, because you make me feel like it's okay when things aren't perfect. And they were saying that, one of them was saying, oh, I listen with my mum, and we both say to each other each week, have you listened yet? No, I haven't listened yet, so don't spoil it. And it was so lovely. And I was like, oh, we still have this lovely idea of getting us people together at an actual event at some point.
Definitely.
We've just got to find the right moment. But I just think, because I just feel like what a powerful moment that will be, because all these people are just going to be like-minded and feel like this is a safe space. It's going to be so lovely. I'm very excited.
Yeah, I think it's very powerful, and it's remarkable how, despite social media and despite how we all have more friends in inverted commas than we've ever had in terms of social connection, that actually people still feel so disconnected. And it's that it doesn't have to be that. Social media doesn't have to be that thing that makes you feel alienated. Through social media, this podcast has been born. And so, it's kind of like your communities are still there. You're maybe just not quite in the right place at the right time, or speaking to the right people. And I think it's cool that we've created this space and created these conversations. And I think it's, we talked a bit about growth mindset last week, and with Liz talking about sort of being very empathetic and open-minded. And I think, there's such an appetite for that now. And like acknowledging that you are one of those people who is open to learning and open to change. And I'm having conversations all the time now with people like, oh, I found this, or my horse said that, or I learnt this from this person and it really changed the way I thought about things. And it's like there's this bit of a shift from, oh, that's the way we've always done it, to,
Yeah.
maybe there's a better way of doing it. Maybe we can look at this in a different place. And I just think it's wonderful. I wanted to talk a little bit about Burley, actually, because Burley has just happened. And Ross Cantor won Burley.
Yes.
If you didn't follow it. Did you know she was pregnant?
Yeah.
While she competed, which I feel,
Yeah.
I don't 100% know how I feel about, interestingly, as in, if I was in her shoes, would I have still done that same thing?
Yeah.
That's what I mean. There's no judgment. I'm not sort of passing comment on it. But it is very interesting that she was competing at that level. And one of the things that, was it you and I that discussed, or a friend of someone else and I discussed about how she is pregnant now and she feels like she can still stay at the top of her sport and be back to compete at badminton while also still being a mum. She has another young child. And I don't know, I just thought it was really, really interesting to kind of see that different perspective, I suppose, because I think that's a big thing. Women often think that they can't still do those things or have their career because they want to have children. It's like one or the other.
Yeah. And she was very open about it beforehand. She said, and actually afterwards, she was like, I have thought about it. I really feel like I'm right to be here. I know she went jumping, I think, the day before the cross-country run just to see how she felt, because she was like, if at any point I don't feel right, I'm going to stop. And I noticed as well, and I thought it was a really lovely thing to do as a fellow female in that position, not in that position, but in the position of talking about another female, the commentary team, while Roz was doing her round, the male commentator was like to the female commentator, which I think was Tina Cook, and tell us about the other pressure that Roz is putting on herself in this moment. And of course, he was talking about the pregnancy, I presume, and wanting to have a little discussion about that. And the female commentator just like swerved it completely. It was almost like she's made a decision. She's really confident. I'm not going to talk about this and open it up. And I thought that was really kind of, I noticed it and I thought I like that actually. I think that's cool.
Well, because I mean, I have experienced people asking me, when are you going to get married? When are you going to have kids? Da, da, da. And as, a 30-something-year-old woman, I'm engaged, I have a long-term partner. The pressure and the way that makes you feel, I potentially do want to have kids, I think, but I don't know if I'll be able to. I have been going through a lot of difficult stuff with my burnout, and I have doubted a lot of my own ability to ever do things like that, to say to myself, yes, I am ready to have children. When people ask you about it or they talk about it in that way, unless you are like super confident and super comfortable, it can feel so uncomfortable to discuss that. And that's so good to hear, that conversation. Like I said, I wasn't passing comment. I just found it was interesting, and it made me consider, would I ride when I'm pregnant? Would I do that kind of thing? I just think it's a really, we talk about being open and honest and transparent and all those things. And yeah, I think it's a really interesting topic of conversation, women at that level in sport. I also want to talk about the fact that Ross Cantor definitely lets her horses live in the field,
Yeah.
We were talking
she put
about
up a video of him as soon as he got home, having a little munch over the gate. He was back in the field. I loved it.
Amazing. And they live out, her horses. They don't just
Do
go
they?
in
I
the
wasn't
field.
sure. I love that.
She spoke about it before, and I think she is not the norm. As far as, from working on big yards, I understand.
I think it's better for eventers.
Okay.
I think it's better for
good.
eventers. But I do think, than for like show jumpers or dressage.
Mm.
But there was a video that Piggy March did with Fairfax and Favour on YouTube recently about the road to Burley. And she showed her fields and she was very open. She was like, my horses go out, but they're in individual turnout. She was like, they're worth a lot of money by the time they get to this level. I want them to have turnout, but I don't want them to have an injury. They're with friends, but they're not with friends. And I don't agree with that approach, but you know, I kind of respected her not skirting it. At least she said, like, this is my decision and this is what I've done, you know, as opposed to trying to just avoid the whole conversation.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes as well, the hard thing that these riders have, like we discussed with Liz Curtius, was that the horses get to a point where reintroducing herd turnout would be very hard for them. And as someone who has mended these horses, you know, as in this is what I do, like I've got these horses that come that are completely strange about other horses. They are like, I don't know how to be with other horses. I don't know how to handle myself in this group situation. They kick each other. They are very highly strung. They're, you know, I get it. It's difficult. And you've got a horse that's worth, if somebody gave me Piggy March's eventer and said, right, you need to look after this horse for the next month before Burley, I definitely wouldn't be turning it out with other horses for the time being.
Yeah.
It would take a long time of gradual introduction over the fence, making sure they have that time together. And that is a really common thing that we have to be completely open and honest about. And obviously, if you start their lives in herds, then yes, it will be easier for them. When you get to the, you know, that you never stop turning them out in a herd is the ideal, right? Is like they have friends and then they just stay with those friends and that's their life. But once you stop, having to start again, it's tricky, complicated.
Yeah. And I think the point here, and actually probably the theme of season 3 in general, and that the conversation here is like, we're not looking for binaries. Like, it's okay to be like, let's just get a bit better. Like, I think being so purist on any topic is unhelpful.
Agreed.
In general.
Yeah, and I think even like the conversation that we had with Tom and Lily about barefoot feet, you know, it was, there are compromises to be made in every direction. And I'd still think personally that I choose to have my horses barefoot for various different reasons, but it doesn't mean to say that it's like right or wrong. And it's just becoming aware of your horse and aware of what's going on that is so important, you know. Is the way we're keeping our horses acceptable? Is it not good enough? Do we need to change it? Are their feet okay? Is it acceptable? Is it not good enough? You know, it's like that constant evaluation that we are doing with our whole lives that we then can do with our horses, not just accepting what one person tells you is the right thing. Does that make sense to you?
No, I agree. Because I've been thinking a lot about the barefoot thing, and I've been thinking about the setup that I have and all the things, and I'm like, okay, am I willing to compromise on X and Y to do this? If I'm not willing to take the shoes off, what do I need to compromise on in the other direction? If I want to keep the shoes on, what does that mean for road work? If I want to keep the shoes on, what does that mean for his joints? Like, as you said, it's a conversation with oneself about all the directions you have and all the choices you have to make, and knowing that there are trade-offs to everything.
And I hope that and I hope that we as a community with this equestrian life is like a space for just considering new things.
Yes.
Could it be different? Could we look at X? Could we look at Y? And I would love for the whole equestrian world to take this kind of mindset on. You know, if you were to ask me that question that I ask everybody at the end of the podcast, you know, if you were to tell equestrians one thing, what would you say? You know, if you could say one thing to all equestrians, what would you say to them? And I think mine would be is that, like, to consider different ways of doing it, you know, just to be open-minded about it and always have a learning mindset. What would yours be? What would be the one thing that you would say to every equestrian, Rhi?
I was just thinking that. And I think the thing that came front of mind for me is that the kind of never stop learning. But I think more fundamentally than that is try and drop your shame. Your shame is unhelpful in every scenario. I think if you can something I've really been working on this year with my mindset. If you can try and approach things with an open mind, an open heart, without shame or hatred for yourself or the fact that you didn't know something, everything gets easier. Everything, because you no longer feel the judgment of other people. You don't feel the judgment of yourself. It makes it easier for you to pivot and change and learn and grow. And it certainly makes it easier on your horse. I think that's been a huge thing for me this year.
I love that. This is cool. We should just revisit
Thanks,
this
mate.
question every now and then.
We should. It's good, isn't it? Do you know, also, what I actually thought you were going to say about Burley was that something I noticed, which was that ground jury, they were on it this year. I don't think I've seen that many horses pull up cross country based on the ground jury before. Like, I was thinking back to that, I think it was Oliver, I know, I was just trying to be vague and polite. When Oliver Townend had that quite memorable ride a few years back cross country, I think it was badminton. I feel like that would never have happened this year at Burley because he would have been pulled up much earlier. So that was sort of nice to see, actually, that, you know, some horses they were just being quite careful, and I thought that was really lovely, actually. And the riders all responded really well, I thought, at least publicly.
That's really that's really positive to hear that, you know, welfare is starting to kind of make a bit of a resurgence, I suppose, and it doesn't just feel fashionable. It feels like actually people are we're all starting to be more aware. You know, I've started to see way more posts on social media about, you know, shapes of bodies and posture and, you know, pain face, and horses really looking like they're enjoying themselves rather than having to do it. And I just think, the tides are definitely turning. You know, a while back I thought they were maybe starting to go in that direction, but now it really feels like actually lots of people are very like, let's change our mindset, let's do something different, let's look at things differently. And I think, let's do this.
Yes. And speaking of that, you and I spoke about this. I think it kind of did the rounds on social media. The winner of the European Championship?
Yes.
Oh gosh, don't quote me on this. Justin Verbumen and Zonic Plus, barefoot horse. And that video did the rounds on social media because it just looked quite harmonious. The horse looked quite happy to be there. He looked like he rode absolutely beautifully. And I just was like, because, you know, when you speak to riders, you know that they care. Like, a lot of them really care. And actually, sometimes you're like, why is it not being reflected in what we're seeing in the media? And actually, when you see things like that, you're like, okay, here it is. It's there. And I thought that was lovely, actually. If you haven't seen that, I think it's on YouTube and Instagram and stuff on the FEI dressage. It was a really lovely test to watch.
And you know what? I think the interesting thing is people will be like, well, why does it matter if the horse isn't wearing shoes or not? But as someone who has a large number of barefoot horses, you do have to notice a lot more. And I think that like, for me, it shows me that maybe there is a greater, maybe a bit more awareness. I don't want that to feel like a negative, but at the same time, it feels a bit more like maybe it's just all a bit more forward thinking, you know?
And again, going back to, it shows what's possible. If you see a horse at the top level of dressage and show jumping and maybe one day eventing barefoot, it just opens up the possibilities a little bit more. And that's really nice and fun.
100%. So this week we are going to be celebrating our sponsor that has been with us for the entirety of season 3. Ruth from White Griffin has just joined us. So I met with White Griffin at Windsor Horse Show back in May, and Rhi has been in contact with them previously before that, and we had this conversation around really championing sustainability. Now, you may say, sustainability, not the most romantic topic on the planet, right? And maybe not the most sort of fire you up, well, unless you're me, and then you get really excited about your non-plastic sponges that you just purchased off Amazon last week. But we thought that by having White Griffin sponsor the podcast, we could really do something for the equestrian space, and we can all be, you know, champions for sustainability in our yards with our horses, because Horses are luxurious, and if we can be doing our bit for the planet while still enjoying these wonderful creatures, then we should be doing that. So you will have noticed that throughout season 3, we have been discussing sustainability in each episode. And we wanted to have wonderful Ruth from White Griffin come along today and talk in a bit more detail about this and tell us a bit where White Griffin came from, and also, give you guys some good advice, but talk about why this is so important. So welcome, Ruth. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We're super excited to have you here, and there's a few things that we wanted to touch on that are quite exciting. But before we do that, why don't you tell us a bit about you, what you did before White Griffin, and how it kind of came to be?
Oh gosh. Okay, so there's a really hilarious article that was written about me about a year ago, which has really stayed in my mind. And the chap that wrote it says something like, "It's very strange to believe that a well-heeled lady from Gloucestershire only learnt to ride in her 20s." And I read it and I was laughing because I feel like my journey to being sat here with you guys and having the company and the business and supporting equestrianism and sustainability is probably extremely random and unconventional, but I'd like to think that that's what makes me really useful to the industry. So I, as a youngster, was incredibly into the environment and animals, as obviously, of course, you guys and any equestrian is. But yeah, I was brought up in, I suppose you'd say, a footballing and cricket family. So horses didn't feature in my life until I moved to the Middle East, and I learned to ride in the desert on, thoroughbreds, which they didn't tell me at the time. I mean, it's probably all the things you're not supposed to do. That was really my introduction to equestrianism. But before that, my whole career was around running big sporting events. So everything from the London Olympics to the England Rugby World Cup to, I was in the Middle East because I was doing the Formula One out there, Wimbledon, all sorts of things. And I spent around 18 years doing that. And I loved it. But I always knew that there was going to be an end point because there was something not quite right. And I had kind of took a moment to think about what's really important to me. Why does this not feel right? And I remembered that actually what was incredibly important to me was the environment, and that's what I loved. And so I switched careers, completely retrained as a chartered environmentalist, took a look at the sporting world and where it was at with the environment and what I really cared about. And I thought, I had previously worked at Goodwood and some other race courses, and I had always loved horses. My husband plays polo, and I just thought the opportunity in equestrianism and to be able to live my life through that sport and to support the sport in transitioning to a sustainable future was just what made sense to me. And so White Griffin went off in that tangent, as it were, kind of intentionally by accident, as oxymorons go. And so I get complete pleasure and fulfillment out of trying to support the British and European industries with really supporting horse welfare and the environment through sustainable changes, essentially.
What a journey. I mean, that really speaks to my heart in general, just of this idea of looking up from a corporate career maybe and suddenly going, what is it that I really care about? And I love seeing people recalibrate like that. I just think it's so cool. I do want to get to quite a juicy question early on, so forgive me. But from the work you've done so far, what is currently your biggest challenge with the industry and sustainability at the moment? Okay,
so I would say on a functional basis, the biggest challenges are transport. Environmentally, transport is its own category at a government level or globally. When we look at greenhouse gases, it's a significant problem since the invention of the combustion engine. This is a big problem. But the reason why it's a big problem for equestrianism is there's no pathway at the moment to support equestrians with decarbonising transport. There's nothing, I could mention one horse box I'm aware of which is electric, but they're not really.
We talked about this.
Yeah.
We couldn't find it. I found it and then I couldn't find it. It was really weird. I thought maybe it got discontinued.
Well, they're just sort of hiding it a little bit because they feel equestrians aren't ready for it. And then there's another one that was produced. It was shown at Windsor, I think it was 2 years ago, by another company, a huge transporter, which had been sold to a show jumping family who compete all over Europe. And they were very into the electric journey, and all their domestic cars were electric, and they wanted a low carbon transport option. And this had been produced, and it was amazing, and it performs brilliantly, and they could have sold it 12 times over, but they literally produced one because the company's owners didn't like the way that batteries.
What's that noise in the background?
Is he wagging his tail against the door? Or...
No, oh no, is there a noise? My dog is behaving impeccably quietly. I don't know whether it's under threat or promise of something, but no, it's just the pipes in the ceiling just having
Oh, don't worry.
Hello moment.
Sorry. So sorry, let's pick up. So you were saying all of their cars were electric. They were really into this electric journey, and they wanted an electric lorry.
So they procured, it's hybrid. I mean, I'm not a massive fan of hybrid in general, but in this particular instance, it was a really, really nifty bit of technology. Yes, a little bit more expensive, but 40,000 on a 400,000 pound transporter is neither here nor there in many ways. The fuel economy, like, they made it back so fast anyway. It's a smoother ride. It was just, everything was great. But the company only made one because they don't agree with the way that they perceive batteries to be disposed of at the end of their life.
This came up actually when we put this on social media about the lorries. A lot of people who commented were like, yeah, okay, electric is great until it's not. And they were talking about the lithium battery disposal and things. So yeah, what's your take on that?
Well, my take is that there are a lot of vested interests in discrediting the decarbonisation of transport. And I'm very clear that sustainability is about looking at the data and the facts, and the answer might sometimes not be what I want. And there's been some really interesting examples where I'm like, oh man, I'm going to need to promote something that I'm not really sure of because actually it's more sustainable. And if I'm true to myself and I'm true to my beliefs that we do the right thing for the planet and the horses, then that's what I've got to go with. All of the information tells us that this transition to move away from diesel and petrol is 100% what has to happen. We've got to get rid of those tailpipe emissions. There is legislation in place that dictates that you have to recycle those batteries. You have to have a minimum percentage content of recycled materials in the new batteries that goes into cars. New legislation is being brought about all the time to improve that process and move away from some of the unpleasant things that we don't like about electric cars. And I think what really frustrates me about it is we're in a society where I expect the perfect solution to be presented immediately. And it's like, hang on a minute, the Industrial Revolution took decades and decades of infrastructure and investment and changes and things going wrong. And it's almost like we totally forget all of that and expect, well, if the electric car is not better than what I've got already, then I'm not doing it. It's like, hang on a minute, the electric car as it stands right now is an appropriate transition to where we need to be, and where we need to be is not having the kind of tailpipe emissions that we've got. And I saw this really cool video. I actually don't remember who it was, but it was nothing to do with equestrianism. This guy that said, imagine if we started out with electric cars and then someone came out with the idea of the combustion engine. And he goes through this whole thing describing, it's like, so just tell me again. So hang on. So what we get the oil out of the ground, and there's like a whole intensive process with that, which is highly polluting. But so then does it get delivered to the house? Like, no. What we'll do is we'll build all these petrol stations everywhere. And like, actually, when he goes through the rationale of what having a petrol diesel car or horse transport or whatever means, it's like insanity compared to an electric vehicle. But it's that transition, and I think people get very emotional about it. And I think with my biggest concern with horse transportation is there is a risk with equestrianism that if we don't ensure that we're transitioning, that our social license problem that we're rightly concerned about, which is predominantly related to welfare, will very quickly come into the domain of certain elements of sustainability. And to my mind, those two big risk areas are our transportation and our use of water.
I'd like to take a moment to thank one of the sponsors of our podcast, Westgate Labs. I have worked with Westgate Labs for a number of years now, and I am very proud to announce that Westgate actually picked up the very first White Griffin Sustainability Exhibitor Award at the National Equine Show earlier this year, recognising their pioneering commitment to environmental sustainability. Westgate have been leading the way in responsible worm control for over 2 decades, helping horse owners make informed choices that help protect both their animals and the environment. Sustainability really is at the heart of everything that they do, with some really inspiring initiatives, things like switching to compostable sample pots, which I have been using, and they are, you would never know that they were in fact compostable. They don't sort of dissolve in the post or anything scary like that, instead of the original polystyrene. Introducing zero waste packaging that has reduced their waste to landfill by 90%, that is incredible, and even rewilding 135 acres next to the lab that was once open cast mining land into a thriving wildlife habitat and nature reserve.
So, if you're looking for a simple step towards a sustainable horse health that you can take today, why not try a worm egg count? It's an easy, affordable way to check if your horse actually needs worming, reducing unnecessary treatments whilst also supporting the environment. Join thousands of other responsible owners who already trust Westgate, including myself and Miri, to help keep their animals and the planet healthier by using code EQLIFE10 to get 10% off, excluding Equicell tapeworm tests and subscription plans. Back to the podcast.
And so if you know, a lot of people that will be listening to this maybe have use of a diesel lorry, something that maybe wouldn't be able to go in the low emission zone, for example, around London, something that is maybe a bit older, maybe even has an old catalytic converter, basically meaning it's not a very sustainable vehicle. What are the things that people can be doing? Because, you know, hearing that it cost 40 grand on top of a 400 grand transporter, you know, it's not very realistic for your everyday person to be able to, you know, I've got a 3.5 ton diesel horse box. I know that Rhi also borrows, shares one with somebody on her yard. What are the things that we can be doing to make sure that we are being as sustainable as we can while still being able to move our horses around? You know, are there things that we can be doing to those vehicles to be helping? What's your, any support there?
I would say number one is the answer to Rhi's question wasn't to vilify your horse transportation or indeed ours. It's the fact that we don't have choices, and that's what frustrates me. If you want to be the most sustainable equestrian right now, it's really hard. So I want to see shift in the industry and innovation and support in that fact. But until that happens, our options are actually what you were saying that Rhi's already doing. So sharing transportation is a really, really good one. It's like the horse equivalent of a car share. So that's either sharing for your individual travel, or in other words, having one horse box rather than two. Or is it possible to share transport if you're traveling to a competition? Can you both take horses simultaneously? That's super challenging in horse racing. They really don't like it from a biosecurity point of view. But equestrianism, I think we've got some more choices, and at a grassroots level, we've got heaps of choices. So that would be one. I think this is unpopular because it costs more money, and I don't generally like recommending things that cost more money, because I also think it's really important to make sure sustainability is inclusive. But you could switch to HVO, which is a cleaner fuel. It's an option. It's something that you could do. And actually, I know of a show jumping venue that have put an HVO tanker in so that they've switched all their fuel out. Anything that takes diesel can take HVO, basically.
Oh, so you wouldn't need to convert your lorry. You just
no, you can't chop and change, but yeah,
I see.
You can switch to HVO. Again, there's some complexities, and anyone that wants to go down a rabbit hole will see that there's been a lot of discussion on our side of the industry about, well, how sustainable is HVO, and is it, conspiracy theories and confusion. But it is fundamentally either, depending on where you sit in the argument, it's either a lot better or at least a little bit better than diesel.
Right.
And I think that's what we've been focusing in on with when it's come to the conversations that we've had throughout season 3 is, what are those little bit better things that we can all start to do that will have a cumulative effect. Now, you mentioned water being one of them, and we did speak about this, and obviously we've actually just experienced one of the worst droughts I've ever seen in terms of summer with horses. Can you talk to us a little bit about, you and I had this very interesting conversation where we spent quite a long time, didn't we, Ruth, on a conversation where we were talking about the sponsorship of the season, and we got into a lot of detail about the kind of the realities of where we're really at, and we didn't really get a chance to dive into that too deeply when we were recording the adverts as such, the little segments that we did for you guys. But can you dive into a bit, like, where are we really at when it comes to water? Because I think, people need to hear this, because I needed to hear it when you told me about it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And just one thing, while I stays fresh in my mind, you, as part of asking that question, you said little things. One of the little things that doesn't cost us as equestrians anything we could do in terms of transport is tell your transport provider that you want a low carbon option. Because what I hear over and over and over and over and over again is equestrians don't want it. I'm not going to invest in it because equestrians won't buy it. So that is something that doesn't cost you any money, but if you believe in it and you want it, tell the brands that you want it. So while I've got that one off my chest.
Okay, so like literally speaking to, if you're thinking about, you're in the process of purchasing a new horse box or whatever it might be, saying to them, we actually would like an electric one, basically.
Yeah, exactly that. Send them an email, tell them, because if they get feedback from the consumer that this is something that would be popular, then they would have more confidence in that investment.
I quite like that, just as an aside, because I've seen conversations before about sustainability, and sometimes it's like, well, just go to less competitions. And it's like, well, hang on, because the professionals aren't going to do that. And they're the ones that travel like 70% more than the rest of us. Why should the grassroots rider, I'm playing devil's advocate, do less when actually a lot of it comes from a different part of the industry or whatever? So I think it is nice to be like, there are things you can do, but you can also lobby your brands and those people who have more power to do bigger things.
And that is intensely powerful. I think it's way more powerful than people realise, because I'm sat on the other side of the table where I'm talking to brands every day about the whys, and the on the whole, the most engaged equestrian brands that are embracing sustainability are doing it because their customers have started to mention it more and more, and they can see the trend coming and they can see what the future looks like. So if we don't speak up, then the brands are like, well, I'm selling my product, I'm making money, and I'm fine. So I do think that we have way more power than we think we do. And we need to determine the future that we want to see. You know, sustainability, it is not owned by anybody. It is not a political movement. It is not an economic movement. Sustainability is about equestrians saying, I want to compete and I want to enjoy my horses as much as I can. And I'm prepared to make some changes in the things I do, but you've also got to meet me halfway. And my personal brand of sustainability, and the one that I infuse through White Griffin and the team, is I'm not here to tell anyone to stop doing anything, because if you follow that line of thought through, you actually get to a point where you're like, well, we'd all be better off if there were no human beings and we weren't, going to events and we didn't go to music concerts and we stopped eating anything at all apart from like just the occasional tomato you grow in the garden and then like put your head in a puddle and drink some water. Like, it just gets ridiculous. And I think that I really detest the brand of sustainability that is about having something less than. Like, what motivates me and excites me about sustainability is this idea that I can feel really fulfilled and happy and shed all my guilt about what I do as a human being in the world. Like, I can go about my day feeling positive that I am not negatively impacting on anything. Does that mean I don't go to events? I don't drink wine? Heck no. I have a super fun, happy life. And I buy things. And I really reject this idea that sustainability means a floppy straw and an ugly house with solar panels. It means like loving the world you live in and caring for it and noticing the things you do and thinking about a better way to do it. So go to the competitions, have an amazing time, compete with your horse, But maybe when you do that, think, oh God, I've still got my diesel vehicle. I'm going to tell my, whichever brand it is, I'm going to be buying a new one in 4 years' time. Will there be an option for me then? And actually just those little micro changes and shifts in behavior is what I'm looking for, not don't go to competitions, you're a bad person. Like, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
I love that.
Powerful stuff.
And
nobody wants a floppy straw anyway.
No one wants a floppy straw. Really, just yuck and no, all kinds of bad. But I do feel like sometimes when I turn up in a room, I feel like the floppy straw brigade, or like the person with the sandwich box that says like the end is nigh. It's like no one wants to talk to Ruth. That would be a really depressing, disappointing experience. And and I just like for my own mental well-being, I don't want that. Like my least favorite thing. Like I was listening to one of your episodes, and I think Rhi, you were maybe talking about going to Copenhagen. Was it?
Yeah.
And I was listening to that, and like I had a little smile on my face, and then instantly into my head, I was like, oh, she would never say that in the session with me because it might have involved a flight. I don't know if it did or not, but it might.
No, it did. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Like the number of people that would be like, oh, I'm going to Copenhagen. I'm really sorry, Ruth. And I'd be like, I'm literally not the sustainability police, and I really am not the fun police. Like, totally go to Copenhagen, have an epic birthday, but also think about like your life in general, and are there things that you can maybe do a little bit differently over time? And that's really what it's about. It's not about not having fun and doing the right, just loving life.
Well, let's talk about the companies that don't see you as the floppy straw brigade, because before you joined us, we were talking about Burley, and Blenheim is coming up. And actually, it might have been by the time this episode comes out. I don't know, my maths isn't brilliant at the moment. But you're working with them for the first time this year, and that is happening more and more. And one that is a bit more of an established event that you've worked with for a while is Windsor. So tell us a little bit about Windsor Horse Show and the setup that people would see if they went there, and what those little actions have been that lead to big changes.
Yeah, Windsor, the team at HBAR are really great with sustainability. They're very, very engaged. They have been for a long time, off their own backs, not because of us. I think that's really important to say. I don't ever want to feel like we have ownership of this. Like they do it because they believe in it. And they've done things like sort out innovative new partners for their waste management, and they've tried things that maybe haven't worked. So they've, and then tried other options, so like electric buggies, and that didn't quite work. So now we're working with them on, how can you do that differently? So I think that's quite apparent in terms of the waste management and those innovations. But one of the other things that I think is really special and important about Windsor, and is true of many other venues like Bicton and many other venues, is the recognition and acknowledgement that you're using a beautiful natural space for your event, and that you have a responsibility to take care of that natural space. That space belongs to the animals that live there, and we're going to borrow it for a bit to enjoy our event. Obviously, with Windsor, that natural space is the King's back garden. So, of all the champions in the world on biodiversity, maybe second to Sir David Attenborough, like King Charles is fairly well known for loving, greenery and the natural environment. And so what you notice is lots and lots more hedgerow going in. You notice the way that they're caring for the grassland, the way that they move, sort of section off areas for biodiversity protections. And those are all things that are really never talked about, but are so important at greenfield events, that we've got to remember we're borrowing this space for a period of time, and that we need to give it back to nature afterwards.
What a wonderful sort of reflection we can all take from that, right? Like, our horses all live in a natural environment, right? What can, that way of saying we're borrowing it, can we borrow the space for our horse to live in? And how can we nurture the environment that they are in? How can we look after the hedgerows? How can we look after the pasture? I feel like this is such a relevant thing. Like, obviously the King is going to do it the best he possibly can, but what are the ways that we can be doing it with our in a small way? We spoke about this, didn't we, with Jane from Equicentral, And the way she looked at it was, how do we get it to a place where our horses and their environment can kind of co-inhabit without affecting each other? That the environment isn't sort of creeping into the horses' space and meaning that they have less space or whatever it might be, not just letting the hedgerows completely take over, for example, but also how do we help the horses living there actually encourage the environment more, birds and insects and proper wildflower and that kind of thing. Is there anything that kind of springs to mind, Ruth, when I mention that? Is that relevant to say?
Oh, this is a huge, I feel like I could completely take over season 4 of this Equestrian podcast answering that question. Say, can I have 10 episodes next season, please? This is, you asked me at the beginning, the whys of equestrianism, and to me, biodiversity loss in the UK is a significant problem, more than we ever realised. We're one of the worst in the world for biodiversity loss, worst of all G7 nations. And we don't think it because for most of us, even if you're in London, you might look out the window and see a tree, but certainly if you're outside the city, you see green everywhere and you think, oh, we're amazing. But actually, we've lost more than half of our biodiversity, and a substantial number of our species are in severe decline and at threat of extinction. And the thing that motivates me so much is, and I've said this for years, is equestrianism is a sport of the land. We are custodians of a significant proportion of green spaces. And as a community of people, if we understand that there are a few basic steps to totally changing the picture of our country as a whole in biodiversity, that if we just did those, we would be well on the pathway to having a really healthy ecosystem. That motivates me every single day. And actually, as you say, it might have been and gone by now, but at one of the key things we're doing at Blenheim with our stand that's there is the Equestrians for Nature, which is about getting people to recognise and notice the nature around them as an equestrian. Because when you notice something, you take care of it. And if you take something for granted, you might do things that would damage it. So I don't feel that anyone, certainly in the equestrian world, has ever done anything to intentionally damage nature. But if we don't intentionally think about the grass in our fields, the choices over fencing and hedges, the choices of arena surface, the choices we make in grooming products, all these things that can impact the ecosystem in the land that we're custodians for, if we don't actively think about it, we could actually actively damage it. So caring for it and noticing it, whether it's your own property or when you're on event, could have the most exciting, transformative impact on the British ecosystem as equestrians. And I feel like I would be so proud, and I would love to be part of a sport that is synonymous with caring for nature and the countryside and doing the right thing. Because a long time ago, I gave a speech at the World Horse Welfare Conference, and I opened up with a story about this guy who was like, those, when you go into like a supermarket, there's always like well, not always, but there's often someone from like a charity with like a table and cloth and a banner. Yeah. And it was like a nature charity. And this guy said to my client, oh, do you care about nature? It was like his opening gambit to obviously try and get donations. And she said, well, we're equestrians. And he was like, so no then. And I was so taken aback in that moment. I was like, oh, wow, that's ballsy. But also that's super interesting. And it got me talking a lot more to people in general. And I found the exact same thing with everyone I spoke to. Every single random person I spoke to in my village or out and about. And I said, what do you think about like horses and equestrians? And they always said the same thing, almost the same words. They trash the countryside. I was like, wow, okay. I don't see it that way at all. But equally, I want to do something transformative with the equestrian community so that people say equestrianism is amazing for the countryside, because our horses need that.
And isn't that funny? Because I was just I was like, what other sports in England would you say are sports of the land? And the two that came to mind for me were surfing and wild swimming. And if you think about the press that both of those sports have had in the last few years, it is always standing up to pollution, it is doing local litter picking, it is like looking after the environment that they enjoy their sport in. And to your point, actually, I don't know that you would think of equestrians that way, which is wild because so many equestrians, not all, but a lot, either grew up in the countryside or live in the countryside. And so, if anything, they should be better custodians than anyone else. And yet, we sort of aren't.
No,
That's quite a bitter pill to swallow, isn't it, actually?
It is a really bitter pill to swallow, and I think it's one of those moments where we have to be really honest with ourselves. And to be really clear, this isn't just equestrians, this is everybody. But because I'm focusing on how equestrians can help, that's what I'm talking about right now. But I feel like there is this very significant period. I don't know what time period I would necessarily give it, but I would definitely say my generation, so I'm in my 40s, where recognizing the importance of soil, the value of insects, how to grow vegetables, knowing the name of a tree just by seeing its leaf. I don't know. These are probably all quite twee examples, but they're what I want to say. You know, most people can name influencers and brands from a logo alone. They probably, a horrifying number of people wouldn't actually know what an oak leaf even looks like. And you would think, well, that's one of the most obvious ones. And so I think that with equestrians, and it's really interesting listening to all your podcasts and the extraordinary detail and the breadth of knowledge that even leisure equestrians would probably have on, I don't know, Cushing's or, you know, whatever it is, like something that if you said the words to anyone outside equestrianism, they'd be like, is that something to do with sofas? Like, I'm not sure what that is. So the knowledge there, and even like supplements and all the, you know, the range is really high. But we have not been brought up to understand how to look after the land. And I feel that you kind of go, oh, I've got a patch of land, great, I can put a horse on it. I mean, I've literally been in that situation myself. In the last few months, we've moved house. I've got my first paddock ever. I'm so excited. And my husband's like, brilliant, I'm going to put some sheep in it and we're going to top it. And we're going like, whoa, hang on a minute. Can we test the soil? Can we do, like, I just want to learn and understand. And because I've intentionally developed the technical knowledge from other experts of actually how you take care of the land in the same way that someone would have done of how you take care of the horse, I'm going to approach it really differently. But that's only because I have this huge vested interest in it. If you don't, if your job is like working in a bank or something and then you have a horse for pleasure, you probably would just go, great, I've got some grass, I'm going to put my horse in it and the fencing looks really sound, so that's magic, and then we're done.
I feel like, and I'm guilty of this too, the reason people probably don't like us is that it's like the horse at the cost of everything else. It's, you know, I know that I have a diesel emissions lorry, but I really want to go to the show. I know that shampoo is more harmful than that shampoo, but that one makes my horse properly white and grey, so that's the one I want to use. It's like always that the horse at the cost of everything else. And I really have an answer as to how we shift that, other than to keep reminding, like you said, that it's the environment you have to look after and be the custodian of. Go on,
yeah, but you know what? I don't think it's an and or. I think it's a yes and situation, because if it's the horse first, that horse needs there's no healthy horse on an unhealthy planet, number one. So if the priority is your horse and not you, or bees, you cannot have a healthy horse on an unhealthy planet, number one. Number two, your horse is at serious danger from the effects of climate change for a number of reasons. The obvious ones to do with, as Miri mentioned at the beginning, to do with flooding and drought and the stuff that we're already seeing now, but also biosecurity, and we can talk about that in more detail if you want. But that is a major threat to your horse's welfare because of climate change. But on a more like pleasant note, putting a variety of sward in your paddock, so maybe putting some wildflowers and some herbs or some different type of hedgerow, is for the horse. Like, your horse needs that. It's Whereas the browsing interest, which is really important for behavioral mental stimulation, like if you gave a child spaghetti hoops every day for 10 years, like you might think in the early days, oh, he's really going to love that, but he's going to get really, really super bored. And it's the same for the horse. But also all of those wildflowers and herbal options actually enable the horse to self-medicate as well. You know, and we're more than happy putting them in our supplements and feeding them to our horses. But when you mention putting it into your paddock, it's like, whoa, she's a hippie. Like, well, you know, those things had to grow somewhere else, right? Like someone else has put them in a field somewhere to harvest them, to put them in the supplements. And I'm not saying don't have supplements, of course. And in everything, always, you know, it depends on the specific horse. And, you know, we always say, like, I'm not unilaterally saying put wildflowers in every paddock and change it and then everything's going to be great. Of course, every horse is different and they've got different digestive needs. But on a fundamental level, things that are good for the environment are for the horse.
I think what I was also gonna say to what you were saying, Rhi, like it's that the horse has got to come first. It is also that to be able to say that, we've got to be doing our bit, basically. And I think that doing your bit phrase that I think got battered around a while back, you know, what could your bit look like? And I wonder if, Ruth, you could go into a bit of specifics maybe, because I think it's what we don't want to leave people with at the end of this season is not some like real things, actionable things that they can go and do. Like I have been so inspired by this conversation, and maybe one day when I have more control over the environment that my horses live in, I will be able to, you know, make these changes and maybe be an advocate for this stuff and show people that it's possible. But maybe until that day, whenever that may be, what things, if you do, maybe give us like 2 in each setting. So say you are Rhi and you're on a livery yard and you've got one horse, what are the couple of things that she could be doing? And then maybe what could somebody like myself, who is a livery yard runner, a manager, whatever you want to call me, go for it. Go for your life. Give us some tips.
So I would say this all comes down to mindset. So I am going to be specific, don't worry. I'm not going to go off on like a psychological tangent, but sustainability is about balance. There is no good and bad behavior. There's just sustainable behavior and unsustainable behavior. So for Rhi, like, it might be that you don't have any control over what happens at the yard, although one thing I would say you can do is have that conversation with the yard owner to say, do you rest your paddocks? Like, I would be open to the idea that we might need to change things. You might need to do something slightly different with my horse to benefit it in the long run, to have really healthy sward. So should we have that conversation? Like, is that something we could look at for next season? So actually have an open, non-judgmental conversation would be something really, really helpful you could do, because I think a lot of it is fear. Like for a livery, and maybe this is the same then on your flip side of the coin, Miri, that like, oh gosh, if I bring in a track system, or if I put different seeds down, or if I suddenly, you know, decide to put hedgerows here or whatever it might be, then my liveries are all going to hate me, and, you know, I'm not going to have a business anymore. So I think what we need to do is make this a really comfortable topic for people, so that we can say, look, I've been thinking about this. How would you feel if we change some of our processes to be more welfare and environmentally friendly? And what it would look like would be this, 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 and this. So from Rhi's point of view, it would be having that conversation so the livery yard owner knows that you're open to it, but also that you want it. And from Miri's point of view, being open to that conversation being presented, but also knowing you and knowing that you're super passionate about it, like not being afraid to have that conversation with your liveries. So I would say number 1 is have the conversation, be open-minded to the research and the options. Number 2 is actually like more of a lifestyle thing. So like, you know, your podcast is This Equestrian Life, and I think sometimes we think really, really like tunnel vision. Yeah, blinkered and tunnel vision about specific things to do with the horse. But actually, what you do with your tack, what you do, with your saddle, what you do in terms of the clothes you wear, the choices you make all have an impact. So things that you can do, for example, and this might sound really simple, and hopefully there'll be people listening to podcasts going, really? That's the advice? We always used to do that. Yeah, this stuff is really simple, but we're not doing it. So learn how to mend your kit, or if you can't, choose manufacturers that will mend it for you. There are lots. There are some really, really good equestrian suppliers now that get this stuff. And it's some of them, it's the big names. Like you'd think, oh, it's going to be some spurious, lovely little chap that lives on the Isle of Man or something, and I'm going to have to. It's not like the big companies are doing these things. You just have to do a little bit of research to see. So, like,
Can you name any, or can you name any of your? Please.
That I'm commercially working with, but at our Windsor stand, we put a Devaku saddle on our future equestrian bit. As I say, like, I don't even know who the people there are, but I just happen to have one because they do a repair and return scheme. So that would be one example that I know of. But I know that there are lots of others.
I've got one. I've got one that maybe is slightly more mainstream, but Weather Beater, they have they ask you, you have to prove to them that you have recycled a rug, like you have, and they will give you a discount, like £50. I don't want to be quoted wrong on that, but I'm going to put the details about this in the. I'll put the details, and maybe if there's any other things, Ruth, that come up that you haven't, other brands that we could maybe list, we'll give people a little list in the show notes. Maybe we'll gather a little list for people.
So I was going to say, before I was so rudely interrupted by my computer deciding it was Friday and it didn't want to work anymore. So from an individual equestrian point of view, where you might feel like you don't have much control, it's very much about having the conversation, but also thinking about what you wear, thinking about not throwing things away, making good purchase choices to buy things that will last. From a livery yard owner point of view, as I said, it's about being prepared to have those conversations with your liveries as well, about, like, I'd like to make some changes. This is what it would look like. What might your concerns be? How can I work through that? But I also want to circle all the way back to a question that you asked me right at the beginning, before I then went on a tangent about transport. One of the big things that a livery yard can do, or a riding school, or any of those businesses, that I would love to see a lot more of in the UK, is rainwater harvesting. We are going to have major problems in the UK very, very soon with water shortages. The water authorities have started releasing that information a bit more. It's actually been readily available online, and the government has known this for many, many years. And there's a national water strategy in place. And part of that water strategy is about putting reservoirs in and fixing leaks, but a substantial part is about us using less water. In racing, there's already something in place called the Leisure Water Charter, which is like a soft commitment for racing to use less water, or to use less mains water. And what this is essentially a first step that was introduced a couple of years ago. There are two things in play here, or maybe three. One, water is fundamental to our sport. Equestrians need to have ready availability of water for the welfare of horses. And I don't actually think we will, but we definitely don't want to ever be in a position where we're conscious of how much water we're using as drinking water and for washing horses. We never want to be in that position. That's not who we are as a nation. That's not what we want to do. But I have a bigger concern that if we don't start putting things like rainwater harvesting in now, and start thinking about responsible water use, as the UK really struggles with chronic water shortages, around 2030 is when a lot of the UK is going to start seeing this. By 2040, almost all of the UK. If we haven't prepared for that, we're going to have another social license issue on our plate. And actually, we saw this in France a couple of years ago when they started experiencing the really severe droughts that we're now seeing more commonly. There was a town in France, I shouldn't laugh, it's not funny, but it's a little bit funny. There was a town in France that had a severe water shortage measure in, which meant that the locals weren't allowed to use the hose pipes, they weren't allowed to use water at certain times, etc. But the golf course was exempt, and that's often the case. As another sport of the land, golf would be another big one. Well, the locals took exception to that, and they went into the golf course and filled all the holes with concrete in protest. And I just think that that's it probably wasn't very amusing to the golf course. And I know it's vandalism. I'm not advocating vandalism. I don't want to get in any trouble. But my point is, I can see a time where if we continue to see ourselves as exempt from all these environmental things, like, oh, our transport can't possibly be low carbon because we've got to tow and it just doesn't work. And we can't possibly use less water because we've got to water our arena surfaces for safety reasons and we need to use water. And and if we can't possibly, we're going to find ourselves in a position of having the equivalent of our holes filled with concrete. And I just think that let's take the time now, while we've got a few years of that kind of adjustment going on, where we're not in a chronic state right now, but we're in a difficult position, to put things like rainwater harvesting in our stables. And ultimately, that's going to save livery yard and riding school owners money in the long run. And you can scale that up or down. So you can do something as simple as a super, super, super cheap water butt. Or you can go for an all singing, all dancing agricultural version where you can store a considerable amount of water. And I just feel like taking water seriously now will pay dividends in the long run. So as a livery yard, making sure that you're putting devices like, I don't know, seal stop or whatever in place, like things that mean that you're not just going to let water flow over your bucket everywhere while you muck out the other stables, or using rainwater harvesting for washing the horses down. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not even remotely dangerous at all to do that, or using the water to clean your tack, whatever it might be. So that's something that livery yard owners can definitely do, in addition to having that broader thought about your paddocks and having that conversation with your liveries.
That sounds like a good place to start for people, most definitely. And in terms of, if you're thinking about sort of improving the biodiversity of a yard, sometimes when I talk about climate change, I'm like, oh, it's the huge continents, like, maybe I shouldn't get into it, but, you know, with their animal agriculture and, you know, things that are very difficult like that, I think to myself, it actually is really important to have that fact of we have lost 50% of our biodiversity. That is actually terrifying and feels like such a important reminder. So in terms of the biodiversity, what things could someone like myself, what could I be doing if I've got full control of a yard? What could I be doing to increase that biodiversity? You've spoken about grass diversity and improving the sward of the grass, so like wildflower. But are there other things that we could be doing other than that?
Yeah, there are, and some of them are expensive and some of them cost nothing. So things like leaving out log piles. You know, this is all about the slightly less Instagrammable parts of nature. They're invertebrates. Well, I think they're super Instagrammable. There's nothing better than a picture of a worm or a ladybird, but I guess that maybe only inspires a very small proportion of the population. But actually, we're too concerned with things being so-called pristine. Nature doesn't really like pristine. Nature likes variety. It likes interest. Maybe I can phrase it like that. So yes, you can put a very neat bug hotel out that you might have bought from one of the major retailers and makes a good Christmas present, but you don't need to spend money on stuff. Like, sustainability doesn't have to be expensive. Just leave log piles out, or even thinking about things like, if you're going to put a fence in, does it have to be a fence or could it be a hedge? And there's so much grant funding for hedgerows now. That doesn't have to be an expensive option. And that means that you've got really good security for your horse, but also browsing interest. If you should choose a horse-friendly hedge, one that they can merrily nibble away on, then that works too. But hedges are incredible habitats for birds, for small mammals, invertebrates. They're also really good for carbon storage. So, okay, that doesn't answer the biodiversity question, but it's always good to keep thinking about carbon sequestration. Trees, grasslands, and hedgerows are all amazing carbon stores. Grasslands in particular are amazing, resilient carbon stores. That's why we need to protect our grasslands. And I don't know if you knew this, but there is no specific political action or plan in relation to protecting our grasslands. So again, equestrians can be an incredible answer to that question. We don't have to wait for politics to help us. We can just do it for ourselves. So I think it's about creating those little habitats. If you spot it's a super cute one, but can you cut a little hole in your gates, wooden fencing, for example, for hedgehogs to get through? Because again, not only do we like things to be pristine, we also like to create a sort of castle barricade around our homes, which means there's no corridor for wildlife to travel through. So if you just leave a little hole in your gate, your fence, that hedgehogs can safely travel from one place to another, that's a really small thing that you can do. There are so many little things, and I think what frustrates me is all that information is readily available on all the big wildlife websites, whether it's RSPB or WWF or, the local wildlife trusts, wherever you are, they all have that information on their websites. But I guess I feel like if I talk to the equestrian community and think about our equestrian homes and make it more specific, maybe that will make it more relatable. But we know all these solutions. We've just got to take a Sunday morning to carve a hole.
I love that.
It's an especially wormy podcast today, which is no coincidence. Worms are very important for the environment, but it is time to thank our second sponsor of the podcast, and that is Equestrian, who offer the tapeworm test.
As we come into autumn, it is that time of year where we need to be not only worm egg counting, but also looking at our horse's tapeworm risk. So there is a very cool website called whatsyourwormrisk.com where you can go and you can assess your horse's worm risk. What this tool can aid in is making informed decisions about worming and support discussions with your wormer prescriber. So what you can essentially do is go and work out whether your horse actually needs a wormer. So with Equestrian, what they offer is a tapeworm test. Now, tapeworm is a dangerous thing for horses. It can cause colic. So it is important to understand whether your horse is in need of a tapeworm specific wormer at this time of year. Our best advice is start out with that risk assessment, work out what kind of wormer your horse needs, if at all, and then worm accordingly.
To learn more about your horse's worm risk or the Equestrian tapeworm test, visit the show notes for all of the details. Back to the podcast.
And you've got lots of resources, haven't you, on your Equestrians for Nature page that we have shared a couple of times in our show notes for the podcast. Which we will do so again at the end of when you guys finish listening, go and check it out.
It's funny. I was on a call yesterday with my colleague Lizzie, who does the equine carbon calculator with me, which is one of the big tools that we've released. And she said, "Oh, it's always so great to have a call with you, because sometimes I just forget about the things that we've already talked about that I already know." And I think that's a really important part of sustainability.
Yes.
Because we have been so indoctrinated into one way of thinking for all of our lives, that this new information, we have to be continually reminded in a positive way, not in a terrifying, the world's coming to an end way, but it is useful to remind ourselves when we're making that effort to cut a hole for a hedgehog or whatever, it's not a silly thing to do. It's a really meaningful thing to do, because I think I'm fairly sure, I might look over to my colleague here at this moment, that hedgehog populations have declined by 98%. And so it is meaningful to bother to cut a hole in your fence. And so it is important to keep reminding ourselves of these facts, because sometimes one feels a bit silly doing these things, but the information is there and it's out there. And, Equestrians for Nature is going to grow. We're developing a huge resource base, which will be released by the end of this year in conjunction with the rest of equestrianism. And I'm so excited about that, because that will just tell everyone everything they need to know. And it's always really important to me that everything is open source. I've always said there's no IP in sustainability. Yes, we're a commercial organisation, but actually the Equestrians for Nature is all about how do we make this information free? How do we inspire and encourage and motivate equestrians to do different things to help nature and to help their own businesses? Sustainability is about resilience and being able to maintain your business and keep riding horses and keep doing what you want to do. You don't have to want to save the planet to want to do sustainability. Sustainability is for everyone and for different reasons. Whether it's accessing the equine carbon calculator or looking at the resources that are available. It's just about doing those little things regularly, and they all make a huge difference.
I have a closing tradition on this podcast, Ruth, and you may have already said the important thing that you're going to say when I ask you this question, but it's become a bit of a, well, it's become this really cool thing, and everybody has some different answer. And the question that I will ask is, if you had one thing that you could say to every equestrian and they had to listen, what would you say?
Sustainability isn't an opinion. We all need to care about the world around us. So it doesn't matter where the points of disagreement are in our politics or in technology or in innovation. None of that matters. What matters is the world. I might sound a little bit crazy here, but as far as we know, we're the only planet in the whole of the universe that is able to sustain life on Earth. And that's because Mother Nature's created this incredible cycle and balance that does that. Everything has a meaning. And we've taken that meaning away by forgetting how to care for nature. And it's our responsibility to remind ourselves that not only do we have a responsibility to care for our horses and the environment that they live in, but that's a good thing. To not be afraid of that, to love it, to embrace it, to make it part of who you are. And that doesn't change how you feel about everything else in the world. But that one thing has to be true for every human being. And I just would love people to care for and notice the natural environment just enough that we nudge our behaviours ever so slightly towards a healthy, sustainable future for our horses and our kids, because that's everyone's responsibility.
Lovely. What a wonderful end to season 3. Just gorgeous.
Thank you so much, Ruth, for joining us today. It has been really, well, lovely to summarise basically what we've been talking about through season 3. And I want to thank you personally also for supporting this podcast, because you haven't just supported the work that White Griffin does. You have actually supported the important conversations that we have been having with all of the amazing guests that we have had in season 3. So thank you for doing something even bigger than what you're doing, which is pretty wonderful on its own. So yeah, we really appreciate the support, and we really appreciate you joining us today.
It's really lovely of you to say, and I guess from my point of view, really the thanks comes back tenfold, because on our own we can't make a change. We don't have a big enough voice, and the amazing voice that you guys have, because of how you are, who you are, your hard work, the people you know, will get us to where we all need to be, will get us to that transition. So I'm just so grateful that you've been willing and open-minded and open-hearted enough to take this topic on with us too. And it's also been really lovely for me to learn from all of the other experts that you've had during the season. It's easy to stay in my own bubble of the planet and not learn about all the weird and wonderful things. And so it's been incredibly inspiring and delightful to continue my own learning journey. So thank you for everything that you do too.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Ruth. I suppose that brings us to the end of season 3, and we should probably close out the season by telling you guys when we will be back for season 4. So Rhi, if you want to hit us with the dates, and then yeah, we'll say goodbye for now, I suppose.
So, Miri and I are going to take a little break while we prepare the guests and themes for season 4. Can you believe we've made it to season 4? And we will be back in your ears on October the 15th. So that will take us right up to Christmas Eve, because we're going to do a bonus episode at the end of that season. And we're still prepping season 4 topics. So if you or a brand you know has a really interesting voice or topic in the area of innovation, thinking about things differently, sustainability, any of those things, welfare, we would love to hear from you. Equally, if you have enjoyed what you've heard and you'd love to be a partner with us for the following seasons, we would also love to hear from you. This equestrianlifepod@gmail.com. Everything you need is in the show notes. And we're also on Instagram, if you haven't already seen, This Equestrian Life Pod. So we might see you there as well. Otherwise, take care of yourselves. Be kind to yourselves and your horses. You will never lose anything by going slower. Any final words, Miri, before we come back?
No, I don't think so. My brain's fallen out my ears. Thank you so much for listening, guys. It has been a pleasure to be part of your week every week for the last 10 weeks. And we will see you very soon. Goodbye for now.
See you on the 15th. Bye.